After all, in the book of Exodus, God gives the 10 Commandments. We just read that last couple weeks. And what does God start out with saying? I am the Lord your God who brought you out of the land of Egypt. You shall have no other gods before me. And one of the details of that is you shall not make any graven image. So the golden calf that the people had fashioned while Moses was on the mountain, that's a no-no. But here, a few books of the Bible later, not too far, much farther along really in the story, Moses says that God has given a direction on how to deal with the snake problem. A bronze snake. Golden calves, God says no. Bronze snake, God says use that. I would imagine it was rather confusing for the people at the time. Didn't you just tell us not to make a graven image and not to worship any other gods? But this directive came from God Himself, and so they did it. And they made the bronze snake, and they put it on the pole, and they lifted it up, and all those who gazed upon it did not die. Wow, that's quite a dramatic story. What's interesting here is that God uses an image of what is troubling them to cure them. It seems a little backwards at first, but when you really look at the story, it makes sense. God is providing them a reminder of their trouble. He names it. He acknowledges it. It's the snakes. So a snake is going to come to fight a snake. Think of the old story, and maybe some of you actually had this experience. I never actually met anybody that this really happened to, but I think it was on the Waltons. The kid who gets caught behind the shed smoking, so Dad makes you smoke the whole pack or the whole carton of cigarettes till you're sick. That's kind of how I think of this snake story. That by gazing upon the face of this thing that brought so much terror and fear and reminded them of their illness, that's where they found healing and the cure that God provided them. Facing it directly, naming the elephant in the room. Jesus reminds the people in his speaking today in the Gospel of John of this event, and he parallels it with his own story, that He, the Son of Man, will also be lifted up. Of course, He will be on a cross. And we still keep that image of a cross to remind us of the price that God paid, of His own life, to show us the depth of His love for us. Now here's this part of the story Jesus doesn't mention. About 250 years after that happened, with Moses and the people and the snake, this is what happened in 2 Kings, chapter 18. In the third year of King Hoshea, son of Elah of Israel, Hezekiah, son of King Ahaz of Judah, began to reign. He was 25 years old when he began to reign. He reigned for 29 years in Jerusalem. His mother's name was Abi, daughter of Zechariah. He did what was right in the sight of the Lord, just as his ancestor David had done. He removed the high places, broke down the pillars, and cut down the sacred pole. He broke in pieces the bronze serpent that Moses had made. For until those days, the people of Israel had made offerings to it. It was called Nehushtan. So, just a couple hundred years after Moses had this experience with the people in the desert, this snake that they kept to remind themselves of that suffering had become to them like a god and like an idol. They gave it a name. They made offerings to it. That to me sounds like an idol and a false god. What was to be a symbol and reminder of what God had done for them became a god unto itself. And it was time the new king decided to get rid of it. Today we live in the shadow of history, the collective wisdom of the Old Testament, the first century life of Jesus and His followers, all of Western civilization, that includes the Protestant Reformation, when a lot of our ancestors in the faith brought down the high places, knocked over the pillars, smashed the statues, and removed imagery of the church. But again and again, these problems come up. When do we make false gods out of signs and symbols, relics of the past, even beloved institutions that once served us, but have begun to replace God Himself in our lives? This cross remains the symbol, like the serpent of old, that we look to and see in it the reminder of what God has done for us. It is the elephant in the room that reminds us that there was a price God paid for our sake. But the cross has been used inappropriately too, as a weapon. It's been used to wage war. The cross cannot be taken to mean that violence must be the way to solve problems because God used it. Instead, our faith reminds us about how God transformed the cross. That He took what we, humanity, used as a weapon of torture and execution, and on that, beat death and sin itself in a final battle where God's way conquered our violent way. The tension of our faith, most intensified in Lent, is this: to name the elephant in the room, the cross. But to remember that like the serpent lifted up on the pole, it's not about the serpent itself. And it's not really about the cross itself. It is about God's power to overcome and transform that symbol and give life through it. John 3:16 may be most famous, but let us not forget verse 17. Indeed, God did not send the Son into the world to condemn the world, but in order that the world might be saved through Him. Amen.